All right, welcome to the Detroit Lions News Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Chap, and I'm along with a special guest today because honestly, he's a great follow on Twitter. I really hated Twitter for the longest time. I don't know if you know this, but I really hated Twitter for the longest time. And then I saw Section 344 Lions on Twitter, and I was like, this guy's, he's all right. I gotta invite him on the podcast because it seems like he's like very nuanced in his takes. And then one day me and you were going back and forth about hockey, which was fun because I like hockey too. We both like hockey. So
Yep.
and I'm a baseball guy, so anytime we get to talk shop and everything, that's great. But talking Lions is the best, to be honest, because I feel like a lot of people. I mean, there's not many creators in the content world of Lions creators that are just like most of them are upset and angry right now. I don't know if you've
For
noticed,
sure.
but I'm just like for me, I'm just like let it all play out because you never know what's gonna happen. We're a month away from the draft and some crazy things always happen, and I don't know why. I think we're gonna see a big move in the next couple weeks, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, because we know Brad Holmes has been doing like these when he goes to the draft. Sometimes he'll make these big moves, whether it's trading up or trading down, and then getting two picks for one. And then that's what got him Sam Laporta and Jameer Gibbs when they trade down, and then he traded up for Jamison Williams. So like whatever this guy likes to do is what he's going to do. And fortunately for the Lions, this draft is very deep in edge rushers and defensive tackles and offensive linemen. Not much for wide receivers because it's kind of bare there, but it is what it is. But thanks for coming on the podcast, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fired up to be here. I know, yeah, we've mentioned hockey. That's a sport I actually grew up playing. So I feel like there's not a lot of hockey talk that I see from
Yeah,
a lot of people. It's just they don't really. The sports is so much different
yeah.
than others. But yeah, definitely Lions. Lions and Tigers were kind of the two sports I grew up on the most, but mostly Lions. And yeah, it's been fun connecting on social media. I agree with you. It's kind of brutal, Twitter, honestly, to be out there, especially
Yeah,
during like a NFL season when it's like a loss is like the worst thing
it's
ever, and
10 times
everyone,
worse. It's
yeah,
10
like
times worse, man.
everyone, I fire everybody, and like it's tough, honestly, to deal on Twitter. And but there are some great Lions accounts out there, and I've enjoyed interacting with a lot of them. And uh, honestly, that's why I started this account. I have my personal account that I not really that active on, but I started this account a couple years ago just to interact with more Lions fans, and it's been great.
Yeah, it's I always laugh at after a loss because the loss is like the sky is falling. And then when you win, it could be like the grossest win that you've ever seen in your entire life.
The Texans win.
Super Bowl, bang,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? You're just like, Settle down a minute." Like that's a long season, man. But I just laugh at some of the stuff that you see on Twitter and even social media in conjunction. Like I got the Lions page on my Facebook, and uh, there's 86,000 followers on there, and it's funny because after a game, I don't even read the comments. I don't read the comments at all because I don't want to become like more inundated with the mob. You know what I'm saying?
for sure.
So when it's a win, I'm kind of like I'll look at the comments just to laugh because like especially during the game, I'll post stuff and then you'll see like Jared Goff, this guy sucks. I'm like, all right, that was that was the Texans game that I
Yeah,
saw that, and I was like, well, now what you saying about that? Like, it's like people need to take a cutout. I know you played sports. I know I played sports. Like people forget that sports is an ultimate roller coaster. Like you really don't get this straight line to success. It just doesn't happen. It's a lot like life and careers and everything like that. Like you don't get a straight line to success. It's usually like this kind of like bumpy little road, like being on an airplane.
yeah, it's a really good point. And I wish sports were linear and it worked that easily. Oh, we made the NFC Championship game. Now we'll go to the Super Bowl the next year, and maybe we won't win it, but then we'll get back and we'll win it. And yeah, it doesn't work like that. And the in between of it all, because of that, is can be kind of exhausting as a fan to maneuver through all
I mean,
the
if
different opinions people have,
yeah,
and try to get to more of a middle ground to see what's kind of actually taking place.
And you're a Detroit fan, so if everything was linear, we would be in a much better situation with all these teams. I mean, the Tigers, it seems like it's been with the Lions, it's been just kind of like it's been like crap all the time. But then the last couple years just been flying up, and then the Pistons, they look like they're gonna be something pretty soon. And then we got the Red Wings. It's like, where are we going, man? Where are we
Exactly.
going?
Yeah,
But it's fun to have you on the podcast. You're a great follow. So people that need to
appreciate it.
they need to follow you on Twitter. I'll link your account on my page and everything, so people will get to follow you because you're really a great follow. You have some nuanced takes, and that's why I had you on podcast because I was like, this guy isn't the average Lions account. You know what I'm saying? I think the average Lions account, they try to bait people into these big conversations. You know what I'm saying? And I don't have time for that. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. Like you have some nuanced takes. I even during free agency because like, this has been the ultimate like wild free agency to me because I think a lot of people were expecting them to spend a lot of money. You might be up. Saw some of your tweets or whatever, and then I looked at this like this. I was like, okay, there's a couple DNs that I like in this free agent class. The rest are old, and then I see people getting all upset because they gave Marcus Davenport the money, which I'm fine with. Like it's not like a huge contract. It's a size. It's like just a incentive based deal, right? And then they're on the same token, they're like, well, why didn't we get DeMarcus Lawrence? Why didn't we get Von Miller? It's like the same reason you didn't want Marcus Davenport. Like it's just like I just think that this whole thing could be by the time we get to the draft, people are gonna be like, oh, I finally get it. Like I really do.
I think there is a large section of Lions fans right now that unless the next notification that pops on their phone is Lions have traded for name whoever, like whatever, when it was Max Crosby, then it was Myles Garrett, and now Trey Hendrickson is maybe out there, but probably not. Like there are still a lot of people that unless that happens, nothing that they do is good, and they could make 4 or 5 nice depth additions to their team that may maybe even guys that are just like the Indianapolis linebacker who I think could be like an impact special teams player for them, but that pops up on your notification. Oh, he's probably not even going to play that many defensive snaps for them. Like what is Brad Holmes doing? What an idiot. So that is a large section of what you see, but and I will say it is kind of tricky at certain points because you don't know what the full picture is yet at this point because we haven't had the draft. There is still free agency moves out there. A couple of years ago, signing C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who was a pretty big addition in terms of what they thought he was going to do on that team, and that was late
March
agency. Yeah, very late
March. Yeah.
DJ Reader, even to an extent, was the second week of free agency. So. And there's still some other guys that they could add to their team that would help. And I think the draft, certainly once we see what happens in the draft, that could shape a lot of kind of rounding out the offseason as a whole. But yeah, until you get the full picture in some people's eyes, until it's the 2 or 3 guys that they have in their mind that you need to get, similarly to the draft where you get fixated on whatever guys and wherever they're supposed to be slated to going, and then that doesn't happen, and it's what the heck, why did we pick this guy? So there's this, in a lot of ways it's boring to say, but some of this you kind of do need to see play out and see what happens.
Yeah, I know it's a boring kind of stance to take, like let's let it play out, right? But at the same token, like I don't know if you've ever like you probably had drafts where you probably had mock drafts where you've seen and you're like, all right, we're doing this again. Like we literally are doing this again. Like I posted a picture of Derek Harmon, former Michigan State defensive tackle, and he went to Oregon. I think he's been around 28 to 35 in the mock draft.
I saw him at 32, the last one I looked at, and they said he was a replacement for Milton Williams to the Eagles.
Yeah, so I mean, like that's a guy like I would be interested in. But like, cause like he'd be around that area. There's another guy that I've talked about in a video or two, James Pierce, who he's got some cultural concerns. We could talk about that too. But like, I like Derek Harmon, but the first comment I get is he's not better than Kenneth Grant, the kid from Michigan. And you know what? Kenneth Grant's a damn good player, but you know what? I don't think Kenneth Grant will be there at that range
I
because
agree.
you see all the mock drafts and you kind of like you put it together like, okay, Kenneth Grant could probably be going in that 17 to 24 to 25 range. I think the lowest I saw him was a sports what was it? I think it was the ESPN article that had him at 25, which was the lowest that I've seen him.
I
And
put
then
on
there were
my notes, I really think he's gonna go in the top 20.
yeah,
But you're right. Yeah, maybe he falls to 24, 25. It would be stunning if he was there with the Lions. But
yeah,
as you
it's
said, they've traded like that's something Brad Holmes has done a lot, even last year with Terry and Arnold. So and with Jamison Williams
and
and other trades.
he could
Yeah,
trade up for an edge rusher, he could trade up for a defensive tackle, you never really know, it's kinda like who you have on your board is, like, the top guy, like, I'm sure me and you have a top guy that we like, for instance, like, I like my top guy for the Lions would be like a Grant, right? Or like a Mason Graham, but Mason Graham's gonna go in the top 5, so I don't even
right.
count him, so
Yeah.
but, like, I look at guys like that, and I'm like, "Alright, cool." And then James Pierce, he's been falling lately, and that's a guy that I'd be interested in. Obviously, if you read the reports about some of the things that are, the combine and all the bad issues that he has, I mean, look, I think at that 28 spot, I think you can afford to take a chance, and obviously, if as well as I know, like, the Lions locker room is kind of forged already, you know what I'm saying? Like, these rookies that come in, they see what the veterans do, and I'm pretty sure they're not gonna be talking shit to Sewell or St. Brown or Dan Campbell or Hutchinson for that matter. Like, it's just like you come in here to work, and that's kind of the way that you kinda have to do things because, you know, in this era of college football, I know you're watching college basketball, like you watch March Madness, I'm sure, and you see the NIL, how it's affecting the game and affecting March Madness and affecting the transfer portal, which you've been you're well aware of because but it's just like the transfer portal is like nuts. So like these kids coming in, they think that they own the place. Like that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, I'm a fan of a MAC school, which is just like the minor leagues of
Mm.
college athletics. I mean, this Bowling Green, the school I followed, has
Now
at
you got
least
Eddie
three of
George.
their. What's that?
Now you got Eddie George, so you're good.
Yeah, yeah, we do, which is exciting to see how that will go. But yeah, like basically in basketball, you get a new starting five all season because every good player. I think no mid major made the Sweet 16 this year, and the
No,
first time in a long time, and that's yeah, stunning because all the good players get taken.
you don't want to
Um,
say it's going to be a trend, but I mean, we'll see what happens in the next couple of years if it's a trend or not. But like, geez, man, like it's just they need to rework the transfer portal for sure. But what my point is though is like you got these kids coming in and they were in the transfer portal. Some were in the transfer portal 3 or 4 times in their college career. So like they're coming in here and they'll be like, "Oh, I could just do what I want to do." And it's like this is the NFL. You can't do what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think now more than ever, and maybe they were, and every team says that they had their guys and they're not deviating from what they're doing. The Lions' way of like being very meticulous in who they bring in, which we talked about earlier with the fans that get all frustrated. They kind of like almost mock that at this point of
Yeah.
like, oh, come on, we need to just get this guy or whatever. They might be kind of ahead of their time in that like if you just get guys that you're 100% confident and you know their work ethic and who they are, there's at least a nice floor with them, especially if you know how to evaluate, what you're looking for in that position. So, yeah, like you mentioned, James Pierce, I'd love for them. Like if that's who they got, I personally like I would have been excited with Jalen Carter. I want the best player I
Yeah.
can possibly get, but I wasn't shocked that they went in a different direction. So I'd love if they picked James Pierce. I kind of doubt they will.
No,
But
that's
he
the
is
thing.
one
Like,
of the 5 or 6 guys I wrote down as like defensive linemen that are kind of in that range that I think Lions fans would be excited if they took any of them. So
yeah, I watch James Pierce a lot because I'm a Tennessee fan. Well, I'm a Tennessee and a Michigan State fan. It's because I like Tennessee is my favorite state, so that's number one. So I just follow the Vols because it's easy to kind of like follow them because they're SEC and usually they're playing Alabama or Georgia and Florida. Like you're like, okay, I hate all those teams, so let Tennessee win because they never really win. But like James Pierce was an interesting one because like a lot of people they hear the stories about him being kind of like half-hearted on the field and like not.
is that all it is with him? Is it because that's what I've read? Is it more than just like he wasn't trying in practice, basically?
Well, it was that, and then there was
In games too, like
he had an entourage in Knoxville. That's
okay.
basically what it came down to, and his entourage was big on, "Oh, we don't need to go to practice today. We can go to practice tomorrow," or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it was a whole different thing, and it was just wild. But yeah, my dog is going crazy. But that's the way it was going. Like the James Pierce is an interesting one because he played so good during some games. Like there's
Yeah.
games where you go, wow, he's the best player in the country, and then there's some games where you're like, wow, like where was he? Like, really, it's kind of like, you know who I kind of contribute him to, Kayvon Thibodeau,
Okay. Yeah.
because he's
Yeah.
kind of like he's
Right.
kind of a similar player. He'll show up when he wants, and he needs to go to the right situation. Like if he goes to Philly, God help everyone, because he might be a monster
That
there.
is a guy that they would take too.
He goes to Detroit, he's gonna be a monster there. If he goes somewhere with, like, I don't hate to say it, but like the Jets with Aaron Glenn. I know Aaron Glenn, like I think he's gonna be a good coach. I really do. I don't know if who you think is gonna be a better coach, him or Ben Johnson, but I think Aaron Glenn will be the better coach. But it's the Jets, so like it's like this kid's gonna come there and he's gonna if he's on the right situation, it's gonna be a total disaster. That's
Right.
basically what it comes down to.
Yeah, I agree.
It's kind of like when the Red Wings draft. I don't know if you remember this, but when the Red Wings drafted Anthony Mantha, like he was one of the best players in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, which is, if you follow hockey, you know what I'm talking about. And like this kid came in and he has all the talent in the world, but he could just never put it together, no matter where he went. Like he went to Washington and he couldn't put together. Was it Detroit for years and he couldn't put together Calgary for years. He just could never put it together, and he was one of the best players in Quebec in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. So some of those players that you think their talent's so good, sometimes they're just their heart isn't in it. Like that's what it comes down to. But I think Pierce is more like a Thibodeau more than like someone like that.
Let me ask you one question about the draft. If you
Yeah.
had to say right now, and we talked about their history of doing so, do you think the Lions will trade up in the first round this year?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually thought about that for a couple of reasons why. Because like I think they're in a position where, number one, I don't think they can sign all these guys that like the draft
That's
picks.
the
There's
biggest reason I've seen recently people say
and
that.
And not just that, look how much salary cap space they have. Like they're prepping for something. We don't know what they're prepping for. Like we heard that they were aggressive for Miles Garrett. We heard that they were aggressive for Max Crosby when at the trade deadline. You know what I'm saying? But the reality of the situation is like we don't know what they're planning because there's so many players that are just like that could be available at that time.
Yeah, right. The other thing too that with that I think that I'm not, I would say I'm the anti of like the cap guy that knows all these intricate details of the cap, but it does seem like that the Lions have like prioritized retaining cap to carry it over for like extensions. So that's
Right.
another thing that I know drives fans insane. It's like they see this number of cap space that they have and it's like why, what the heck, we can sign a $20 million guy. And when in reality, that very easily could already be earmarked for whoever,
Like a
Kirby
Kirby
Joseph,
Joseph,
Ryan Branch, Hutchinson.
Hutchinson. Yeah,
So
those guys deserve the contract extensions. I mean, like we always talk about who we're gonna acquire, but like the best way to acquire players is keep your good players, right? Like there's no doubt about it. Like, I mean, you don't want to be a feeder system for the rest of the NFL, like losing players like Kirby or losing a guy like Brian Branch or losing a guy like Hutchinson. Like, God forbid you lose a guy like Hutchinson. Like that could really turn your whole franchise around. You know what I'm saying? But like that's what that's what they gotta plan for. Like Brad Holmes is really good at doing that because like, well, I interviewed with LA Rams when he was there as like the senior guy, the college scouting guy, and he's very, very keen on like being very pragmatic on the way that he approaches things. So the way he approaches every kind of like difference, like if he's he's going in the draft with like a second rounder and a fifth rounder, like he knows who's going to be there at that point in time. Like that's just what he does. He's really good
exactly.
at that. But you also got a guy like Mike Disner in the salary cap portion where he's one of the best in the NFL. Like he literally is. He's one of the best salary cap guys in the NFL. Like people are worried about the $6 million or something, the low cap that they have next year. Just look at Jared Goff's uh, money that he's due next year and that's going to be totally restructured. It's going to be restructured by the time we get to camp next year for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of I read an article today with their talking about Mike Disner with the way that they set up the contracts with DJ Reed and I forget, it was some
Derek
one of
Carnes.
the yeah,
Yeah,
where they're now like they're it's definitely towards the eye of the future with how they're doing this because they have the void years now that they didn't have set up the way they had. So, and they mentioned Jared Goff in this article too about how his like inevitably something will change with that. Like you said, probably a restructure. And they also get to the point in like 2028 where that's the like St. Brown's final year. So they're and do they have Jared Goff beyond his current deal? So there's like an insane amount of salary cap stuff that has to be, and I'm like to the point, and they haven't re-signed a lot of these big guys. So I think fans do kind of, for the most part, need to realize like this team was arguably the worst. I've said for the longest time the Lions are like the least successful major North American pro sports franchise. They've gone from that
by far.
to arguably the best, very arguably the best roster in the NFL, and that's been almost entirely through Brad Holmes drafting players. And so that is going to remain the like huge core part of this team, and the way to recycle that the best is by drafting again. Like Brad Holmes talked in the like he kind of beat to death the fact that it's impossible to find edge rushers. Well, like probably their best avenue towards that now is going to be taking a defensive lineman in the first round. Like what if the Eagles, like you can go down the line through the Eagles recent drafts and almost all of their good front seven players were guys that they drafted. So
Yeah, here's that article.
yeah, this was the thing I was looking at.
Here's your article you were talking about.
Yeah.
It was from Pride of Detroit, and
Yeah.
it's a
Great
good article.
article.
Jeremy Reisman does a damn good job at the whole Pride of Detroit thing.
They
But
do.
you see the salary cap, the way it breaks down, like the signing bonus is, there's a void year there. There's cap hit. The cap hit in the void year is 7.4 million, and you can see the void year for DJ Reed is 17 million. So that's another thing that Mike Disner does that is just insane to me because these are things that you kind of you kind of qualify as okay. These void years, before they get to the void years, they might not make it to that part of the deal.
Exactly.
It might be like something like what happened to Zadarius Smith, because we all know Zadarius Smith was due what, like 50, he was due like 11 $12 million for that void year. So I mean, why would you pay that if he's not going to be on the roster? So that's part I look at. But as you can see, the biggest cap hits for both contracts are in year 2, while the unusual 3 dip is because of the fairly massive 2028 dead cap hit caused by this relative new strategy for lines of utilizing option bonuses in the final year of contract. So it's basically an option bonus. So it's pretty. Again, that's a whole Mike Disner kind of specialty, and this is what he does. Like he does a damn good job at that, and you can't really fault him because I mean, if you look at the way they've been able to do things, it's been the same exact thing. Every contract they've structured, it's like this. So
yeah, and the other thing with that too is with that article mentions it with the rising cap. So if you put the bigger, if you're planning for the bigger cap hits to be later, like the percentage of that is going to be lower than what it would be if you're front loading it. So it's going to be very interesting over these next, really everything. This is something I've thought about with the Lions is, and part of this, what we talked about with the discourse, why it's so kind of dramatic is we've never seen this as Lions fans before with building a team this good and how they're going to have to go about maneuvering, keeping it, and who to cut out and who to keep, and how like you're not going to be able to probably do certain things that you would if you didn't have all these in-house all pro type guys that you want to keep around. So how Brad Holmes and his staff like chooses to go about this really is going to be fascinating because no Lions fan, unless you're like really wanting to study the other teams and how they use the cap and everything, none of them have we have no idea really what this looks like and how this is run. So, and no team has really drafted as well as the Lions. So it might even be more tricky for them. You know, a couple have definitely comparably, but there's going to be guys that you don't want to see go that are going to have to be let go, I would assume. So,
like a guy like Kevin Zeitler, who we lost to free agency, like obviously that was a guy that, you know, people go $9 million, like we should have paid him. But it's like, okay, they got Christian Mahogany that's could potentially start, right? I think Mahogany is going to be a damn good player. I think when they drafted him, I was like, I thought he was going to be a third round draft pick, to be honest.
a lot of people had him way higher. Yeah.
And he fell all the way to the 5th round, and like you're like, damn, we did it again. Like we literally did it again. Now I know they took a guy who is a development guy in Giovanni Manu or whatever, but I talked to someone who is close to my fiance, that scouts the Canadian Football League and all that jazz, and that he said that he's like more like a Jordan Mailata. Like is if he gets a little bit more, you know, development, because he's going to need development.
He's a long-term project.
He's a
I don't think they
development
think
guy.
he's even like 1 or 2 years away. I think they think like if once Decker's gone, if he can replace him, that's what they're shooting for.
Well, the
Which is
barometer,
what, like Jordan Mailata was a huge project.
yeah, the barometer is like Jordan Mailata. Like Jordan Mailata, I think he took 3 to 4 years before he kind of turned up. But the guy I was talking to, he said, you know, he could potentially take like 2 years. And I was like, 2 years is way too, but he said serviceable. And then the 3rd and 4th year, that's when he's going to get to his peak. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like that same thing. And I understand why he did it. Like the one draft pick that I was kind of annoyed by it, because I watched Tennessee, was the Hendon Hooker one. I didn't think Hendon Hooker was I've had conversations with Spirit Detroit, who does a podcast, and other people that like, look, Hendon Hooker is a good player, but this is not the offense for him. And the offense for him that he played at Tennessee, it doesn't even exist in the NFL. Like it really doesn't. They're Tennessee's a one read offense. Like the kid who's there now, Nico Amuleva, he's a hell of a quarterback, but like he's the only one that's been able to do like this read option stuff. Hooker didn't do it. Milton obviously didn't do it. Milton has like a 10-cent brain, but he could throw it farther than God's green earth. But like Hendon Hooker was like a little bit, and then they signed Kyle Allen this year. Like I was like, what the hell? And this is all the free agent signings. Look at those, like the re-signs and the people they picked up in free agency and all that jazz. But I'll tell you what, off this list right here, I think that, like, look, I don't know about you, but the Carlton Davis one, where Carlton Davis was paid more by New England than DJ Reed was paid by Detroit. And if you look at the statistics, like DJ Reed was a way better player in terms of how many times that he's been targeted, because he's on the opposite side of Sauce Gardner, and how many touchdowns that he gives up, and he doesn't give up much yards after the catch. And you're like, all right, I could deal with this. Like this could be really good.
Yeah. This is interesting. Like the last couple of things you said were two of the bigger points on the offseason that I was interested in talking about, with Zeitler and Davis and Reed. And starting off with Reed, like to me, that's their best thing that they've done this offseason. And I really like Carlton Davis. I didn't think at any point the Lions were going to be able to bring him back. From all accounts, it looked like he wanted to get a big deal and was like gonna go to whoever paid him the most money, which doesn't really equate to the Lions being able to bring him back. And yeah, I mean, ESPN had him as the #1 overall free agency, or #1 overall player in free agency, period, let alone corner. Like any list really you looked at had DJ Reed ahead of Carlton Davis. And I don't even I don't even want to make this an anti-Carlton Davis thing, because I actually really liked him. But
yeah, I like him too.
If you're just looking at like a 1-for-1 comparison, or someone that at least is going to be as good, if not better, and then you're signing them with the value that they did at, like, that just aged like unbelievably, and they like just signed him.
$12 million cheaper.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to split hairs and you want to say Carlton's a better player, DJ Reed's a better player,
whatever.
Like, there's the reality of the situation is there's a $12 million difference. Like that's the main course of it. Like, no matter how you slice it, you like Carlton Davis more, you like DJ Reed more, you think Carlton Davis is a better cover corner, you think DJ Reed is, whatever the case may be, there's still a $12 million difference. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and it just to me, the other exciting thing about that signing is unless he just got like really horrible advice, which I'm not thinking he did. I think he
Yeah.
knew roughly what his market was going to be. He wanted to he played on the Jets, which were a horrible franchise, and
Yep.
basically it was a nightmare probably the last couple of years
Oh
playing on
yeah.
that team. And he wanted to play on a winner and he wanted to play on the Lions. So he took from every other really signing of a comparable player, took a pretty big discount. So that to me was their biggest win so far. I am interested now to see what they do at offensive line with losing Kevin Zeitler. I definitely wanted them to bring him back. I thought under 1 year they could get a little aggressive
Yeah.
on what they wanted to do. But I mean, I love Christian Mahogany. I entered the offseason thinking that he would be a starter regardless of if they brought Kevin Zeitler back. My big I guess I'm interested or question mark, whatever you want to phrase it, is because I would have loved for them to just kind of gone defensive line early, no matter what. I can now more easily justify taking an offensive lineman in the first round. And I
Yeah.
also just as a whole wonder with offensive line being probably the biggest strength of the team, or at least that's kind of how it's been advertised over the last few years, is are you comfortable going into next year with Christian Mahogany, who I think we both agree like and projected probably to start this year,
Oh
but
yeah.
was a 6th round pick that has 2 career starts right now. So it's not a set in stone thing that
Yeah.
he's amazing. And then Graham Glasgow, who I think was bad last year, had
He
a
looked
down year.
he looked
So
brutal last year. But you
yeah,
know, the one thing okay, I know you make up a good point, James. Everything you said is freaking phenomenal. But the way I look at it kind of like this is okay, like people make a difference. Like I was talking to one time I got the chance to talk to TJ Lang before a Lions game. And I asked him a question because it was the year that they signed Zeitler, and the year they signed and Glasgow moved over, and it was before the Rams game. I go, so what's the biggest difference from moving to the right side to the left side as a guard? And he goes, well, if you were a right side guard and you're going to left side guard, everything changes. Or if you go to left side to the right side, everything changes. So my hope with Graham Glasgow, and this might be like a hope, and hope's not a strategy, but like my hope is that he goes to the right side and reclaims kind of his old self, even if it's not like what we got out of Zeitler. If he just reclaims what he did 2 years ago, I'm happy with it. And if Graham Glasgow can be like Jonah Jackson, like because we didn't get much Jonah Jackson the year before, I think that could be helpful. You know what I'm saying? But I
yeah,
really think they looked at Graham Glasgow and they just wanted to move him back over to the right side because the left side it seemed like every time you watch, I don't know if you have the all 22 or whatever, it's like $14 or whatever. But if you go back on and you look at like just the offensive line, especially in the Commanders game was horrible for Graham Glasgow. That was one of the worst games I've ever seen from a guard in my entire life. He got absolutely obliterated. And sometimes it was because he was stepping way too slow. And like I talked to a couple people that like their offensive lineman, like one played at college level D1. That yeah, ironically he played at like Ohio, which is your rival at Bowling Green. But he's like when you're making steps like slow like that, like it's usually because you're not used to that position. Like you really aren't used to that position. I thought about it like, and me and you went back and forth on this. Like, what's the difference from the left side to the right side? So I was like, I'll go ask some people so to figure out what's the difference. And basically, what I was told is like the difference is so massive from the way that you learn, from the way that you step to the way that you hit the defender. Like it's just a whole total difference. And my hope is that he reclaims his spot as like kind of like a serviceable guy on the right side. Because on the left side, I'm telling you right now, that was a replacement level, bench level. Like it was terrible, especially in that Commander game. And then what was the game that he looked like total ass? It was
he had some rough ones last year. The other
oh
thing too, though, with what you're
Houston.
saying, and it's true how different. I think every offensive lineman I've heard say that it's a massive difference in switching sides. The other thing that'll help, and this was kind of the other interesting factor I was thinking of, is obviously with the Lions playing right guard being insulated between Penei Sewell and
Sewell
Frank
and
Ragnow. I
Ragnow, yeah.
do think that's a huge thing and is interesting because I almost viewed it as like they'd want to put like basically the rookie Mahogany in that spot because it would be a probably an easier transition playing between those two guys. But at the same time, I agree. And Glasgow's natural position is right guard. I think you can more justify probably putting him in there. It would probably say more about Mahogany if you felt he could play,
Yeah.
and he did play left guard against the Bears, and then I think he played right guard when Zeitler was out against Washington in the playoffs. So Mahogany is, he's like Glasgow in that he at least has the flexibility to play both sides. But that is going to be like it almost to me is like whoever you're least confident in between the two is who you would put at right guard. But maybe it just fits perfectly with Glasgow and that he struggled last year and right guard's his more natural position anyway.
Yeah, I look at it like this, like Mahogany, if I remember correctly, last year when I looked at the draft and they give a breakdown of where he played on what side year by year, and he played right guard his freshman year at Boston College, which you usually don't play much at Boston College in your freshman year.
Right.
He played 3 games on the right side and 3 games on the left side. Then he played 4 games and then 4 games on the left and right side. And then I think it was the last year that he played at Boston College. That was the year that he fully played at like the left guard. I think he played right guard. No, he played right guard because left guard was a senior that was from the COVID. You remember the COVID senior years?
Yeah. Yeah.
The guy was like 28 with kids. It was like, damn, dude, like this guy's got some strength on him. But like, I was crazy about that. Like the whole Zeitler thing. I wanted Zeitler back because I think Zeitler is a hell of a freaking player. Like the way that he was last year, like he was a great fit. But then I looked at it like this. I go, well, god dang, if we got to put Glasgow out there at left guard again, I might go insane. Because I was saying it the whole year, like he just doesn't look right. Like he looks like ass. Like it's totally even like teams that would expect him to like roll. Like he was getting rolled up by like Chicago. Like I mean, Chicago has a decent defense, but it's not like someone on the defense is like, you know, there's not a defensive tackle on the Bears that you're like, wow, that's a guy that's gonna wreck a game. It's like, dude, it's easy for you. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't believe that Hank Fraley couldn't get the kind of ways right, but it's kind of like it's like when you talk about hockey, right? Like there's usually one defenseman on a pair that could like he could swing to the right side or he could swing to the left side. I think that's kind of like what it is. And there's some defensemen that can't even swing to like the other side. They have to stick on their side. And it's just like, okay, well, the versatility this is where versatility really comes into the fold. Like people always mention versatility around the draft time. I love that term because it's always overused. They're like, oh, this guy's versatile. It's like, dude, he's played the same position since like middle school. Okay, like it just doesn't matter. But like the Glasgow, he's not versatile at all, and he hasn't been versatile for his whole career. And it's probably why
he might be a better center, honestly, than guard, which helps with the flexibility of that. With if Ragnow misses a game or two, which he typically does. But it's like, yeah, I think he would be like better fitted on a team that needs a center because I think he's actually a pretty good center, but guard, he's not as good of a guard in my opinion. But I do think I've talked about with this, I may end up being wrong with this, and I've sort of walked it back a little bit, but like right when we lost Kevin Zeitler and like the talk of that, I was thinking like Glasgow's not even going to be a starter this year. And I saw some Lions beat writers even suggest that, like that they would either it was like Will Hernandez rumors, the Arizona guy.
Yep.
Like maybe they sign like a free agent, or maybe they do
draft a guy.
Like I don't think it would be insane if they even in the second or third round could be viewed as like a plug and play guard. Like guard's way more of a position than center or tackle that you could start day one in. So I'm not. And if you have the part of my reason in wanting to have Zeitler back was I thought the depth of like Glasgow being like the backup center, backup guard would be really good depth. So I'm not 100% convinced. I guess we'll see what happens with the starter at guard. Is it going to be Glasgow? I think most Lions fans think it's that Mahogany is going to be one of them, but I'm not 100% sure yet if it's going to be Glasgow. Is my opinion.
I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if they go get a guard in the draft. I really wouldn't be, because this, like I said earlier, this draft is I think it's fixated towards the Lions, to be honest, because the
Yeah.
depth of the positions is like, okay, defensive line's deep, edge is deep. You got some linebackers that are deep in the pool of draft prospects if they want to go that route. Offensive lineman is definitely deep, especially for guards. Like
Yeah.
people look at like Will Campbell from LSU could be a great tackle, but more likely he's going to be a guard in the NFL. That's basically what people are saying. Kind of like the Riley Reef. Remember when we drafted Riley Reef in the first round? We're like, oh, we got our left tackle. Too bad he wasn't a left tackle. It was like just like ugh. But like with the guy like with the amount of people that are available in the draft for what the Lions need, this is kind of like the picture perfect draft for Brad Holmes to like really cook. Like they say Brad Holmes cooks, like this is the
Let Brad
perfect
Holmes cook.
draft for him because this is everything that he needs, and the best players available will probably be defensive linemen, offensive linemen, edge rushers. I mean, I know I always joke about this, so you could joke about this too. Uh, every year around this time, people think the draft ends in the first round. I'm telling you right now, the draft does not end in the first round. Because every year
I
I'm
mean, the
told,
Lions have proven that for sure. Even
every
last
year
with Mahogany in the 6th round, like that's crazy.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derek Barnes. I mean,
Yep.
like they've got some good mileage out of some of those late round draft picks. So like, I just laughed because like there was a year, I think it was a year St. Brown came out, and I remember it because I look back on it when the draft happened. I'll see it again around draft time. People were pissed that they drafted this kid from USC. Like there was
Yeah.
one guy, that's like USC sucks. I'm like, well, they do, but this kid might be pretty good. I mean, if you read what you read, like he's a total workaholic, and his dad and all that jazz, and his brother was playing in the NFL. I'm like, I'll give him a shot, you know what I'm saying? And then there was a guy, Derek Barnes, who I liked, but he came from Purdue, and it's like
He was
Purdue's
a
not a
stud at
predominantly
Purdue.
big like name school, so like coming from Purdue is different than coming from Florida or LSU or Michigan or you know USC or something like that. Like it just is. And I think the whole reason Amon-Ra St. Brown dropped to that point was because of his size. People were like, his size is a problem. It's like, all right, well, you know, I mean,
I
we've seen.
remember a really funny, like, the narrative at that time with the Lions was that, like, we desperately needed to take a wide receiver, like, super high. Because when we ended up taking St. Brown, Brad Holmes said in, like, I think, like, one of his opening remarks in, like, the press conference that night was, like, "Oh, now people can stop," like, kinda made a joke of, "Now people can stop bothering me about taking a wide receiver." It's like, and people kind of made fun of him for that. It's like, oh yeah, okay, you took one in the 4th round, like he's gonna he's gonna be anything, and it was St. Brown. So that's like that's pretty unbelievable, honestly. These stories that he already has on the job here.
I love when people like they make up the whole thing about like, for instance, like the one time I was laughing so hard, it was the draft where they drafted Kirby Joseph. And I remember Kirby Joseph from Illinois because if you watch Big Ten football, you know Illinois is
Mhm.
they're kind of like that pesky little team that, and plus wasn't Devin Witherspoon was on that team too?
Yeah,
So you
he
got
was
to
the
watch,
next year.
yeah, you
Yeah,
got to watch Kirby Joseph and Devin Witherspoon that year. And then the year after, Devin Witherspoon goes in the top 5, and I'm pretty sure he would have been a Lions pick if he was still there. But um, Kirby Joseph was another guy. Like people were like, "What the hell? Like they're drafting this guy? Like what does Illinois do?" I'm like, who cares where he comes from? Like who literally cares? Like the whole remember, I don't know if you remember the whole Gibbs thing where like they drafted Gibbs and then
oh yeah,
Campbell and then Laporta and then Branch, and people were like, well, they could have just drafted Gibbs and where Laporte. I mean Gibbs where Campbell was, and it's like
right.
whatever. It
That's
fell
not
the
how
same
that would have
way.
worked.
It fell the
Yeah,
same way because you know for I think the Commanders would have snatched Gibbs up. That's what I think
there
because
were
I
a
think
lot
that
of teams that apparently Brad Holmes said he got, and who I believe him, but he said like teams like contacted him after. It was like, yeah, we were gonna take him. Like he wouldn't have fallen to your next pick.
yeah, and it's like I mean, it's that's just the way it is. And I mean, I look at this draft and like you look at some of the guys that are available. Like there's a kid named Gray Zabel from North Dakota State who he's pretty decent. I mean, he's good at everything, run blocking and pass blocking, and I mean, he plays in North Dakota State, so you're kind of probably have to have like a little year of development because coming from D2 school is not going to be the ideal situation. But I don't know, man. I just think that the way this draft is fixated and the way that it's coming about, like edge rushers, like I just ran a little pro football focus, like where Detroit would be picking. I'll share it on the screen, but like these are all the players that are like available right now, and I'm just like, okay, well, where do you go? Because like there's a kid named like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss who I think could be a potential like guy that you could like potentially look at. I mean, there's a guy like
The Texas Tech guy there could
yeah,
could go higher.
oh
That
yeah,
Toledo kid's gonna be good. He'll
there's
probably go in the second round though.
Scorton's pretty good. I always look. I don't know about you, but when I look at these guys, I look at their pass rush win rate. And like a guy like James Pierce, who I said he's a little bit of a loose cannon. He might be good, he might not be good, but his pass rush run win rate is 23%, and his run stop rate is 10.1. So that's pretty damn good. So I mean, it's just where you go, and it's like okay, there's guys that are available from the defensive line all over the place. Like you mentioned the Toledo guy. This is another guy who's pretty damn good. I mean, for a
He's
defensive
really
lineman,
good. If he went to a Power 5 school, he'd be like a top probably going late first round probably.
yeah, 6'4", 310-pound dude, and his pass rush win rate is 12.9. His run stop rate it's good, but it's not overall great. But he does a damn good job, and he has like 4 sacks, 8 hits, 25 hurries. He was pretty good active last year, but I mean, you just look down these lists, and I mean, like even a guy like T.J. Sanders who played for South Carolina. I mean, this is a guy that potentially could be a guy teams look at too because he's more of a speed rusher up the middle. So I mean, like I said, you could just look at it right now if you're watching a podcast. Like people are gonna be like, well, you know, you're picking 28. Well, at 28, there might be some good guys. Like we mentioned Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon might be a good guy to look at because he played at Oregon, he played in the Big Ten, he played against some good offensive linemen, and that's usually how you kind of get to know some of these guys. Is like be like, okay, well, that's how it is.
Yeah, I think what you said is true, and really, it'll be pretty easy to determine how the Lions view it because Brad Holmes has always talked about there's like a certain bucket of players that he has a first round grade on. So if it is just as simple as on surface, I agree because the 5 or 6 guys I wrote down are all guys that I think Lions would pretty much all ones that were on that list available. Like if they sit there at 28, I think they're very comfortable in saying that there's like 3 to 5 guys that one or 2 or 3 will be there and we're happy to take one. Or if they trade up, which they've done a ton, they think that that guy's like a really big time difference maker and maybe there isn't as many like true guys like that that they feel would be available at 28. So I think Brad Holmes is history in the draft and what he's done and how he views it kind of makes it easy to say after what happens how they viewed like the first round or whatever round it is.
Yeah. Who's the 5 you wrote down? Just curious.
Yeah, the Gray Zabel, the offensive lineman. He's the one offensive lineman I wrote down. I think that guy, he's skyrocketed from what I've seen. Like
Yeah.
from the end of the season till now, like he's. I think actually in the first mock draft I saw, he was like the Lions' second round pick. I put him down. Then the rest were this defensive lineman, Kenneth Grant, who I think I mentioned. I think he's going to go in the top 20 if I had to guess. Jihad Campbell, who that was like a really hot name. Like that could be a guy who maybe he's the one they target and say we're going to trade up to 21 or something. And because he's a guy that the Lions don't really have. Like they don't have like kind of how the Eagles have drafted these linebackers that are more like their premium trait is like pass rushing, as whereas Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone and Derek Barnes, like very good linebackers, but none of which you're like, yeah, let's turn loose and they're a stud rushing the passer. So like maybe Jihad Campbell brings that to the table and the Lions don't have that. And he's more of a guy like a complete player. Maybe that's the guy they target. And then the other 4 were Walter Nolan, Mike Green, the Marshall guy, who that seemed to be a very popular pick at some point in the mock draft season, maybe still is now. And then Derek Harmon and James Pierce.
It's funny because every mock draft I do now, like Mike Green was a popular name.
Yeah,
I think everyone had
like
him at
early on
28,
he was.
28 or whatever. But like in this mock draft, the Pro Football Focus, I just submitted right up to the Lions pick. I mean, you have the Bengals taking Mike Green, so I mean, what are they going to do? Trade Hendrickson? Will Johnson made it to the Seahawks. A guy who Mike Tannenbaum projected to the Lions. I don't know why.
Will
Malachi Starks.
Johnson?
Malachi Starks went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but Will Johnson went to the Seahawks.
Okay.
So, but there's a guy like Shamara Stewart who could potentially be a guy you could trade up for. Michael Williams, who went 11 overall in this draft. Jahad Campbell went 13. So there's
Okay.
some guys that you could really trade up for if you really wanted to. I mean, it's interesting because a team like the Chargers took Colston Loveland, who I think is going to be a good tight end, and then the Vikings took Omarion Hampton, who I think is going to be a good running back. It's funny because I think the first two picks are going to be rounding out the way that they are. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if we get to the draft season and Jackson Dart's in the top 5.
That'd be wow. Yeah.
I think he's going to really rocket up the draft boards because I think there's going to be a team that's going to be like, I need this quarterback. Could be the Raiders. And they're going to say, screw it. It could be the Saints. It could be the Raiders. It could be the Jets. I mean, the Jets could be a guy that, they take Jackson Dart or something like that. But I think the first two picks are going to be Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, in my opinion. I mean,
I'm a rare fan that this is something that really interests me, where I'm really interested at some of these like the teams that the Lions are playing. I think almost all of them coming to Detroit, but like the Giants coming to Detroit, that could be a team that takes a quarterback high. The Browns, are they going to go with Kenny Pickett, or are they going to take someone? I really have no idea what the Browns are going to do. It seems like everything I see has them either taking I'm blanking on the Penn State edge rusher that's going to go super high.
Abdul Carter.
Yeah, Abdul Carter, or it has them taking one of the quarterbacks. And then I guess it kind of seems like the Steelers are going to take Aaron Rodgers now, maybe. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what I guess maybe did the Giants sign Jameis Winston?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this draft, they took Travis Hunter, which would be pretty good. And then the Patriots took Abdul Carter, so that's a pretty good pick for them.
Yeah, it would be.
Ashton Jeanty to the Raiders is a Raiders pick for sure. Mason Graham went to the Saints, so that's interesting right there. But I do think Jackson Dart's going to fly up the draft boards. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with what team takes a quarterback or what team deviates from what they need to take a player that they think is going to be the guy that they want. Basically, you see it every year. There's usually a team that says, "Oh, F it, we're not going with a tackle. We're going to go with an edge rusher, or we're going to go with a running back or a wide receiver." And that happens every draft, and it just seems like it throws the whole draft off. Like last year, did anybody have it in their mind that their first 15 picks were offense? I don't think anybody had that.
Too.
It was this
things when a ton of quarterbacks go. You feel like you get good value at that point if you're a team after that, because everyone needs a quarterback.
Yeah, Jahad Campbell is a guy that I like. I do like Jahad Campbell a lot. I think his missed tackle rate is really good too. It's a 5.9%. So that's outstanding. Because I always look at when you're a linebacker, missed tackle rate. Because I know he's kind of like a guy who could rush passer too. But when you get in there, do you make the tackle or do you not make the tackle? That's how it goes. But yeah, like a Jalen Walker from Georgia, that's a guy who could potentially be a pass rusher, but he's way too he's a skinnier dude, so he's not going to be a pass rusher every down for sure. But he's a guy that could potentially be a guy that you could watch out for. But I like Michael Williams the most. I really do. I think, but him being in the top, but his pass rush win rate is 11%, which is not great. And I don't know. It's kind of like I think that if you stay back at 28, I think you're going to get a good player regardless. I really do.
That's what it definitely seems like. I hope that it's a good enough draft and we can just stay there and take a guy. It'd be exciting if we traded up and picked someone, but and that's the other point we had talked about earlier is are they at a point now where they don't really want to draft a bunch of guys? Let's just get our number one guy that we want and be a little bit more aggressive in doing so. And that could easily be the case. So maybe it is as simple as they're going to be a little bit more aggressive, consolidate some picks, and go make sure that they go get an impact guy in the first round. Because if they go out and get like if they let's say they take one of these defensive linemen and they're really really good, and it's like a Jared Verse type impact this
Yeah.
year for the Lions, like then that like basically transform like that's everything that fans want. So like it's really gonna. I really hope it's and I've actually I don't know if they did say this, but like Brad Holmes in the draft, it's a weird thing for me to analyze as a fan because I trust him more in the draft than I think I trust any GM doing anything.
Yeah.
I think he's earned that. Like there's a lot of different elements of being a GM, but in terms of drafting in the like Brad Holmes is unbelievable at this. So I feel a little weird having some big opinion, but at the same time, I always do go into the draft with what I hope to see happen, and I do hope like Brad Holmes, like in a most ideal world, maybe it is for me like we trade up and get a guy who Brad Holmes thinks is going to be an absolute stud on the defensive line, and we finally get the really high end premium guy with Hutchinson that every Lions fan wants.
Yeah, I always say like, in the NFL, like you have to draft really good to be good quickly, and he's done a good job at that. In NHL and Major League Baseball, it's kind of like a slow grind. Like you kind of get these guys and they are either coming from the Swedish Elite Hockey League or the minor leagues or something like that. In baseball, they're coming from AAA or Double A or even Single A sometimes. But in basketball and football, it's like a quick process, like to get better. And like, I look at a guy like Steve Eiserman who's drafting pretty well with the Red Wings. Like their fact that they like Axel Sandin Pellikka looks like he could be a real star
Yeah,
for the Red Wings. But it just seems like it takes so long for them. But in the NFL, like it's like you instant gratification really quick. Like we don't. It's not like Max Clark with the Tigers or Kevin McGonigal who could be potentially really effing good at shortstop. It's kind of like what you're getting really quickly, and I like that you get to see that because I think a lot of fans don't really see the end game because you're like, okay, well, why is it taking so long? Well, it's taking so long because you got to draft and develop, and though that's the way the Major League Baseball and NHL sadly is, but the NFL, it's like instant gratification. The way that you get better is like drafting the best players possible. And I've never felt like this with the Lions general manager, like you said earlier, like where you're like, whatever this guy does, I have to trust that he got the best player because the way that he's been drafting, it's uncanny, man. Like there's no way you should be drafting this good. It's kind of like I don't know if you play Madden or not, but it's like if you you draft in Madden and you're like, F it, I'm going 99 overall with all these guys because you can do that. And that's kind of what it's like. It's like he doesn't really care where he drafts this guy. He's gonna get the best possible draft pick. Like say Brown, like that's another guy. Like we talked about Derek Barnes. I mean, Brian Branch was a second round pick. He should never been a second round pick.
right.
You know, drafting Laporta and Brian Branch in the second round. You look at like Kirby Joseph,
McNeil in the third round.
Lee McNeil after he drafted
Yeah.
Anza
Yeah.
Kirby Joseph, like, and then you're just like looking at it, you're going, Jameer Gibbs. Oh, he signs Dave Montgomery. He drafts Jameer Gibbs. It's like this guy every year he does things. It's like I can't doubt him. Like the whole Carlton Davis, DJ Reader thing, DJ Reed thing. I won't say DJ Reader, but DJ Reed thing is like he got way less than Carlton Davis. It's kind of like Jamal Williams over again. Like Jamal Williams left the Saints, and
Jonah Jackson, Zeitler.
Yeah, and you're like, you got better, like, and you paid less money. Okay, like, I mean, look at Jonah Jackson. They didn't last long in LA.
Exactly.
I mean, look at like, I mean, who was it? Jamal Williams didn't last long
Jamal
in New Orleans.
Williams
So I mean,
bombed out badly. He was like
it's just
entirely Detroit made, basically. Crazy.
it was just like incredible to see like this guy every time he makes a decision, whether it's like, oh, this guy wanted to go somewhere, well, I'm gonna let him go, and I'm gonna grab someone better, like Jamal Williams for David Montgomery. I mean, I remember people were pissed off because they got rid of Jamal Williams because they didn't pay the money. And I looked at Dave Montgomery and I was like, well, he played good with the Bears. You look at his yards per carry and you're like, I think there's something there. And then he pops off. I mean, him and Jameer Gibbs are one of the best two tandems in the league, in my opinion.
Yeah, they are. I think I've actually put this out. I've talked about this on my page over the last couple of years. I think Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery are one of the best combos in NFL history. I mean, if you really look at there's like 4 or 5 that everyone would name off the top of their head, but like there really hasn't been a case where it's rare that you have 2 like really, really good running backs. Like you have all sorts. It's now in the NFL where you need multiple running backs.
Yep.
There's all sorts of cases of teams having nice complementary pieces, but especially to this point where it's almost like David Montgomery has been the starter and he's very good, and then you have Jahmyr Gibbs who's just like a superstar. But like David Montgomery would be the number one on basically every team outside of a handful. So it's an incredibly good duo.
It's interesting though the way that Dave Montgomery will start a game, right? And then you bring Jahmyr Gibbs in, and it's like a total change of pace. Like you get a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs coming in, and he's so good. Like he literally is just phenomenal the way he plays. Like the so agile. He's so quick, and like his acceleration when he gets through a hole. Like I didn't expect that out of him at all. But they just key off each other. Like Dave Montgomery is more like the bruiser type.
Mm-hmm.
Jahmyr Gibbs is like, all right, you want to come bring some people in? I'll just juke all of you out of your shoes. Like I'll speed away from you and you won't catch me. So that's how it goes. And I think that the way that Brett Holmes has done things, like you said, I mean, even like the guys that he brought back. I mean, we'll go back to this a little bit, but the guys he brought back, like El-Quadin Muhammad, like I thought that was a good deal. Roy Lopez, which I think people were like, "What? Who the hell is Roy Lopez?" I mean, they're like, I know George Lopez, I don't know Roy Lopez. And then you look at like El-Quadin Muhammad, which I said is a decent deal for a depth guy. Levi Onwuzurike. There's a really good chart that I have right here. This is it right here. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter, but look it up. There is Roy Lopez. You look over there, it's DJ Reader. Lee McNeil's over there. Levi Onwuzurike is right there up at the top. Like, I mean, there's some good players on that defensive line. I keep telling people, like last year, what you saw from the defense, I don't think that was like the reality of the situation. You know, like they went into that Commanders game and I felt like they were on fumes, basically. That's what I felt like, because there was no talent left, and I felt bad for them because, you know, the offense carried the day, but there is going to be a chance where the offense just kind of like had a bad moment or two, and it's over. That's what it would take.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't touched on Levi Onwuzurike yet, but going into the offseason, I really thought, because PFF, who's I think actually very accurate in their projections on what they think the contracts will be for free agents, they said Levi Onwuzurike was going to be like 11 to 12 million per year. And I just was like, yeah, like not even a chance that the Lions are going to be.
I remember that. I remember you post on Twitter, you're like, you know, or X or whatever the hell they call it, you know, the Twitter X, whatever the hell you call it. But I remember you posted on Twitter, like Levi Onwuzurike, 11 million. I was like, I didn't even think. So I went and checked that Pro Football Focus. And I was like, holy shit! I even looked on Sport Track to what their market value was, and it was like 10.9. I was like, all right, see you, dude. You're not worth 10 million.
Yeah, it was just a kind of a really interesting case to follow, because it's like he was like his season last year was really, really good. And the other thing about it too is like he had to play on the outside way more because with all their injuries, and he's way better inside. So like I would assume he would be their start, like him and Reader will be their starters, and obviously, I mean, they rotate. Lopez will be in there, but like
until
Onwuzurike to hold it down until McNeil comes back, and then you have like Onwuzurike as like basically your like weapon piece that you can throw in there, like getting him for 5-6 million or whatever it was. I mean, it makes sense just because he had the basically 3 years where he had an injury and didn't really do anything, and then 1 year where this past year where he was really good. I did question, like, that didn't really make sense why the number was so high, but to ultimately get him on a 1-year deal, like I do think, again, that was one of the highlights so far of the offseason, because I think a lot of teams probably would have taken him.
I gotta put this comment up because this is funny. We were talking about Kevin Zeitler and we were talking about Glasgow. This guy makes the perfect analogy, and I'll read it verbatim. In response to going from right guard to left guard, they say you're right-handed. When taking a dump next time, try wiping your left hand. Then you tell me. I mean, I never thought of it like that, Daniel, but that's
It would be much more challenging. I agree.
that's a more challenging way to do things. So, yeah, like the Levi Enrique thing, I just brought that comment up because I thought it was I thought it was hilarious. But the Levi Enrique thing, like I felt like all the guys that were left on the field at the end of the last year, they were all playing out of position. Every single one of them was playing out of position. I think like Ezekiel Turner, like he's more of a guy who plays on the inside. He was playing outside, he was playing rusher, and it was like crazy. Like he's never played a rusher in his entire career. You went and got Jamal Adams and
Oh
and
my
Quan
goodness.
Alexander off
Yeah.
the scrap heap.
Yeah.
And then you had, Miles Adams. I think Miles Adams played pretty well last year too. But like Levi Enrique was asked to do way more than he was supposed to, like especially on the outside, like you said. And then Pat O'Connor on the inside was a little bit different because he's usually playing on the outside as well. So they kind of switched, but they had to do something because there was games where there was like 3 defensive ends on the roster and there was like 5 defensive tackles. So that's just the way it goes. But it's interesting the way that whole thing went out. And like I said earlier, like Levi Enrique is not someone that like people like they go, oh, that's a great resign, right? But like he was pretty decent last year. And I mean, I look at it like there was some players that I was like, I don't really want him back. And Levi was like, okay, if we bring him back, I'll be happy with it, to be honest. But like I was looking at some of his I was looking at his where is it? I was looking at his defensive grades last year from snaps by position. You were right. He played he played defensive line. That doesn't really tell me nothing, but detailed positions. He played on the left end at the end of the season. He played the left end more than any position he's played on the field. And it
Yeah, I
was
don't think the
interesting.
Lions want that.
No, because he was playing. So this is interesting. So he went from if you look at the week 18, week 17, he played 9 snaps in the defensive tackle. He played 13 snaps at left end. He played double digit snaps at end for the last 4 weeks of the year, including the playoffs. So that's nothing good for him. I mean, he's way too good of a player, and his play really took a nosedive, especially like the
Yeah, he
especially.
was quiet at the end of the year for sure. I mean,
But I think it was because what you were saying, like
right,
playing
I agree.
those snaps that were like kind of like out of his it just nothing was good. Like you could tell that he was playing out of position, and you don't want guys playing out of position because if they play out of position, like it was with Glasgow, like it's not good for anybody, and that's kind of like what they were dealing with last year at the end of the year. Like it was
Yeah, they had a
incredible.
guy run on that. Remember that too many guys on the field penalty in the playoff game where it got him. Basically, it was like the final nail in the coffin. It was they had too many guys on the field on like a 4th and 2 at like the 5, and it got him an automatic first down. And there was a guy named, I think, Stanley Thomas Oliver was one of the guys running onto the field. I try to take a lot of pride in like even these random guys at the end of the year. I largely knew who they were. When after the game, when I rewatched that and saw that there was a guy named Stanley Thomas Oliver, and I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to him.
Something close.
I just
Yeah.
had no idea who this guy was, and he was one of the guys that was like he had to be thrown out there panically because and then we got a like backbreaking penalty. It's like that kind of sums up like what the state of the roster was. Like if I pulled 100 Lions fans, I would be stunned if more than like 3 knew who that guy was because I had legitimately never heard of him and he was playing for the Lions in a playoff game.
Yeah, and I think that whole thing was when they lost to Meek Robertson, it felt like the state
Oh
that
yeah.
it was
What a
over
brutal,
anyways.
yeah, brutal.
I mean, you just can't take that many injuries. I keep telling people like I was talking to someone and I put it on Twitter and everything. It's been retweeted a lot, but I was talking to someone who was saying like I don't know how you expected them to even get the home field advantage like they did. Like that was insane because like of the roster and it's like that's what we were saying about Brad Holmes though. We see in his work that he did the best he possibly could with the amount of times he's at a scout practice squads. I mean, like he had to go to Jamal Adams and Quan Alexander, who, I mean, they're nothing.
Yeah, that was the other guy I was forgetting. Yeah, Quan Alexander. He was
Yeah,
not going to get him out.
and then Stanley Oliver Jones or Joseph
That
or
was the guy I was
something.
saying of
Yeah,
Stanley
like
Thomas
I was
Oliver,
like,
I
who
think is
the
his
I
name.
so I
Never heard of him until the playoff game.
it's funny because you talk about like you didn't know who he was. I go through the roster every game because I want to like know who's on the roster. Like if I'm missing a guy or maybe I didn't see someone getting called up from the practice squad or something like that. But when he came out there, I was like, who the hell is this dude?
That was my
Like,
exact reaction.
I was like, who is this? It's like, remember when Brady Breeze came on the field for safety in the first year of
Yeah.
Dan Campbell? You're
Yep.
like, what freaking college did he go to? I mean, I know he went to Oregon, but I was like, who the hell is this? Like, this is insane. Like, this isn't a guy who should be in the NFL. I mean, he's obviously in the NFL, but like should be starting playing meaningful snaps in an NFL game. You're like, this is just too much. There's way too much. It's insane.
Yeah, and one of the last points I had here relating to that was like one of the spots I'm kind of eager to see this year for the Lions is linebackers, because if you really look at it, and I saw your tweet as well about Derek Barnes. I was pretty stunned when I saw the final number for him on his contract, because him and Levi were just two guys I had no idea what to make of their market.
No idea.
Uh,
I
but
really didn't.
like if I'm just
Especially with
looking
Derek
at their
Barnes coming off injury.
linebacker, yeah, right. If I'm just looking at their linebacker room right now, like I think they think it's like potentially amazing, because you have Alex Anzalone, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You have and then really for the first time you can deploy, like even Jack Campbell going into last year, like the projection on him was like good rookie season, like definitely needs to take another step. Like you weren't 100% sure with what you had. Now I think he's like kind of coming in, like he still has room to grow for sure, but I think you're much more confident and excited about what Jack Campbell is. You didn't
Absolutely.
have that last year. And then Derek Barnes basically didn't play last season. And then the last guy I would want to point out, because at the time that he got hurt, Malcolm Rodriguez was playing like out of this world good. I forget what game, it might have been the Titans game. I remember where he like covered a running back on a wheel route like 30 yards downfield and had an amazing pass breakup on third down, and then he got hurt like the next game for the season. So like they have all four of these guys, with like Jack Campbell being someone who I think they think is like a potential star still ascending, and now they have all four of them like at their best versions for the first time. Like we haven't seen this before. So in linebackers, I think was kind of noted was like it was with the Quan Alexanders and the Jamal Adams being trotted out there at linebacker and Ezekiel Turner out of position, and like that was arguably their biggest weakness last year. Somehow the defensive line was still somewhat holding their own compared to all the guys that they had, but the linebackers, especially when Anzalone was out, was just like a total mess. So having all these guys and with where they're at in their careers right now, I'm pretty like I think they think their linebackers could be like I don't know, like top 10, top 5. I think they think the ceiling's probably pretty high with their room that they have.
Yeah, and I want to bring up a guy too. It's Grant Stewart. I mean, this guy. I mean, I think he could be a potential guy. I mean, Dave Phipps,
stud at minimum.
yeah, Dave Phipps said something about he's like he's number 41, a hair on a fire player. This guy is relentless. He's got a great story. Just read it this summer. There was a great article. If you didn't read the article about him, it's freaking great.
Yeah,
but
I did read this.
A great player, and I have a lot of respect for him. And like that's the kind of guys that you want in a room, right? Like that's the guys that you want in the room. But you're right, Malcolm Rodriguez. There was something I noticed different from prior seasons with Rodrigo. He was better in pass coverage.
He was like unreal by the time that he got hurt. He was making some really good plays, like deep down the field. And I was shocked. Like some of the plays he was making, like wow, like this guy's like I like Rodrigo and everything, but like I was like okay, like that was at the time where I think we had already maybe we didn't lose Anzalone. I can't losing track of all the injuries, but it was like wow, like this guy. I know the coaches like him, but he seems to be taking it to another level. And then he got hurt like the next game, basically.
Yeah, Rodrigo had a great year last year up until injury. Derek Barnes is he's been getting better and better every year, and that's kind of like where I saw his progression going. Like, for instance, like when I watched Derek Barnes at Purdue, he was more of like a guy who could rush the passer and all that jazz. Now he's more of a guy who can cover and everything. Like he's not a great cover guy, but he could do the job as best as he can. And then I look at a guy like Alex Anzalone, like he's the older statesman back there, the reliable leader back there, the green dot back there. And then you look at Jack Campbell, like you just said it, like Jack Campbell. I don't think people understand that Jack Campbell is just reaching his peak. I don't really think people understand how good he could potentially be. Like that was his second year last year, and I felt like he took a huge step further than I thought he was going to do. And when all the injuries were happening and everything was falling apart around him, he still played pretty well.
He's a lone soldier out there.
And that tells me a lot about the player. Like I know Jack Campbell from Iowa. I know he's a good player. Like I thought he was going to be a good player, and a lot of people overhyped him, be like, he was going to be like some fantastic guy out of the bunch. But I said give him a year or two and see where he's at. And I think year two he took this good climb up there, and he was asked to do a lot more than he's ever been asked to do because he took over the green dot. He took over like the pass coverage. Like he's not great in pass coverage yet, but I think he's getting there. And I thought
if he takes a step at like if he can add anything as a pass rusher, or because he had some pretty good like film as like in pass coverage too, and I think he's gotten better in pass coverage.
Yeah,
like he's incredible as a sideline to sideline tackler. He's as good as anyone in the NFL, and it's pretty remarkable watching him out there. Like he is a like heat-seeking missile tackling these guys. That as a floor is, I think, really, really good. But I think they definitely think there's more upside to him, and like I think the runway with him to improve is still like absolutely realistic that he can continue to ascend.
But like you said, I think the linebacker crew could be really, really good. I mean, last year, let's be honest, like at one point you're starting Quan Alexander at linebacker, Ezekiel Turner at linebacker. I also love the pickup of Anthony Pittman because he could fill a role at special teams too.
Great special teamer too.
So that's good. And I just think that like the Grant Stewart thing was kind of like the cherry on top. Like you don't have to add a linebacker right now if you don't want to. Like if they see someone that they like at linebacker, yeah, of course you can add them. But this linebacker room is going to be really, really good. And I think that's going to be like, it's funny because like you remember when you watch the Lions and you're like the secondary blows and the linebackers blow. And it's like secondary is very, very good. Like I think Terrion Arnold is going to really hit his stride in year two because again, another guy that was thrown to the wolves. Like there was nothing that he could do. I mean, when you have no pass rush, and Zadarius Smith did as best as he could, I give him the ultimate credit because he was he finished 13th in win rate, which is really good. But if he's your lone soldier on the defensive line getting to the passer, we got problems. Like we really do. Because you look at the guys ahead of him, and I mean, it's like Micah Parsons. I mean, Hutchinson still finished above him if you take out the snaps or whatever. And it's like, God, it's like this is when you're down to that nitty gritty of players, it's not good. And so I just I like where this team is going right now. I think that the draft is going to be good for them, and I think that like a Terrion Arnold, he's going to get better in year two. And a Rakestraw, I think Rakestraw could be really good. I think Rakestraw is going to be one of the guys that I think is going to take a stride in year two.
This might be my like biggest homer take of this podcast, and every time I say this, I basically preface it by asking like, am I crazy here? But I really think the Lions, you can make the case they have the best secondary in the NFL. And a big portion of that is I'm pretty high on Terrion Arnold. I think like you said, as a rookie DB, I think it's very rare. I mean, the two Eagles guys, particularly Quinyon Mitchell, was unbelievable this year as a rookie. But that's very rare to see kind of like a plug and play, true like high impact guy. His coverage skills are incredible. Terrion Arnold is like a 20-year-old or whatever he is. So I am like pretty high on him taking a big jump this year. And then you have DJ Reed, who is a great corner.
We talked about that, yeah.
Amik Robertson, who's one of the best slot corners I think out there, and has the versatility. Like he played at a high end level outside when he was asked to against Jefferson, and like I think he's a really good corner to have. Rakestraw. One thing I don't know if the clip's probably out there somewhere, but Rakestraw actually it probably is out there because it was completed at Green Bay. He was covering Jaden Reed, and it was a 4th down. And they completed the pass for like 30 yards, but it was like he was covered like a glove 30 yards down the field. Like it was an incredible throw and catch that they completed it on him. But like him in the second round is a guy that, and speaking of draft cycles, a lot of people had in the first round, Ennis Rakestraw. So it's going to be pretty exciting to see what he can deliver. And then they have the best safeties in the NFL. I don't think that's kind of just a fact at this point with having Branch and Joseph back there. It's like, and then I was shocked that they added, like, I like that they added Rock Ya-Sin. I was like, okay, they lost Vildor, who was a decent enough depth piece last year. And then they add Maddox on top of it, who like played 17 games last year for the Eagles, had a huge pass deflection in the Super Bowl. Like, I was pretty shocked actually when I saw they added Maddox. I'm like, wow, like, why would he want to come here? Like, we're kind of already loaded in terms of like depth and players. So
don't ask Eagles fans about Maddox, because they'll say that he's a bum and blah blah blah.
Right. Yeah.
But Maddox is a good player, and even he's
like cornerback 6 on this team or whatever.
Yeah, even his defensive coordinator. This was an interesting quote that I pulled up. I think it was from a Philly.com article or something like that, which is their newspaper. He was talking about Avonte Maddox, and he was saying that he was the biggest instrumental role in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean's development. Because like they had Darius Slay and James Bradbury, but like he was like the veteran in the room that like when they got down, he put them back up because he's a team guy. Maddox has always been a team guy. When was at Martin Luther King high school, and he was always a team guy. If you ask,
like Lions tattoo, yeah,
and a Red Wings tattoo. He's a baller. Wow. And I think look, you can't get enough good players in the locker room. You really can't. And like last year, we saw what happens when you have injuries. So am I comfortable with your potential 5th or 6th cornerback being Avonte Maddox? Yes. Like, exactly. What are you talking about? Yeah. Back to your point about the whole thing about this being the best secondary in the NFL, you might be onto something, because like
it at least has a case.
You can make a real case for it, because Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph are the best safeties.
It's a big part of it. Yeah.
Top 5 safeties in the NFL. I think we can all agree on that. DJ Reed, his statistics put him up in the top of the NFL in terms of, passer rating against, touchdowns given up. I mean, if you think about it like this, I don't know if you noticed that, because this is kind of like a nerd out that I did. I looked at how many touchdowns he's given up in the last couple years. There's only 2 cornerbacks that have had less touchdowns given up
than DJ Reed.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know those corners?
Who?
You can guess that one is the defensive player of the year. So there you go. Patrick Surtain.
Oh, Surtain. Yeah.
And then the second one, which I wasn't surprised about by the very least, because he seems like he can have good days and bad days. But Jamil Dean from Tampa Bay, he's another guy.
Yeah.
He's been very, very him and Jamel Dean's probably one of the most underrated cornerbacks in the NFL, in my opinion. And I think the only team that could really say about the secondary is maybe the Buccaneers, but they're the guys on the opposite side of Jamel Dean and Winfield. Like, there's not like a safety next to Winfield that's like Brian Branch level, right? There's not a guy like that. And then you look at around the league, like Quinyon Mitchell for the Eagles, and then you look at their safeties. It's like, is any of those guys Brian Branch or Kirby Joseph? No. Exactly. And even if you look at like Green Bay, like I thought Green Bay had a decent defense. I think their defense is pretty
good. They have good safeties.
But Jari Alexander is a total head case. You never know what you're going to get.
He's probably not going to be there.
So,
or at least we'll see.
I mean, you make a perfect case about the secondary being one of the best in the NFL. I mean, if they just get a pass rush that stays healthy, they'll be good. And I thought they were well on their way until Hutch got hurt. And then when Hutch got hurt, I was like, all right, we'll see what happens, because Lee McNeil and all those guys, and then you saw Lee McNeil go down. You're like, this. I remember
the Buffalo game was really the killer. That's when they lost McNeil. They lost
this, yeah.
I mean, that was the killer to me.
And I posted a status after that game. I'll add you on Facebook too, but I posted a status on Facebook after the game, and I got killed by a lot of people, like Lions people, like Lions fans, and I posted it to my page, and I should never have done that, because then people were like, oh, da, da, da. But then when I had the last laugh, unfortunately, during the playoff run, because I looked at Lee McNeil going down and Carlton Davis, and I'm just like, man, this is way too much to overcome. Like, do you really expect to win the playoffs with guys like Miles Adams? Like, I love Miles Adams, but is he Lee McNeil? No. DJ Reader is an older player, so to expect a lot out of him to carry the load is disingenuous. Same as Zadarius Smith. I was like, Zadarius Smith carrying the load at defensive end is not going to be good. And then, when Amik Robertson went down in the Commanders game, I was just like, oh,
Like the first drive too, or whatever it was.
there we go, man.
That
It's
was
like
so
it's like
brutal.
that was your one chance. Like Robinson is one of your guys that like a lot of people they overlooked him too when Brett Holmes signed him. I remember when people were like, "Why did we sign this guy? This guy's getting beats in coverage and all that jazz." Comes here and he just plays good. He played really, really well, man. I was really ecstatic about that. But it's just like, man, if that pass rush could stay healthy, and I know people want to add to the opposite side of Hutch, which I think they will, because they're saving this cap room for something, and they got a lot of draft capitals, and there's a lot of good. We talked about all the players that are available. They're gonna get better in the defensive line. It's just a fact. So, I mean, I look at it like this: like, if they continue to progress, like Terry Arnold continues to progress, like that defense is gonna be really good. Because we talked about the linebackers, we talked about the safeties. I mean, the offense is still gonna be the offense. I don't care who you are. Like the whole offensive line, Jahmyr Gibbs, Dave Montgomery, Jameson Williams came in and do his own last year. I felt Sam Laporta had a little rough part to the year, but he started to come on at the end of the year because that injury he suffered in minicamp.
Mm-hmm.
But it just goes back to this, like, there was a stat I read where you had your initial 53-man roster. Only 2 of those players played the full year. 2. It was DJ Reader didn't even play the full year, but he played enough to where it's like over 85%. And another guy was Levi Onwuzurike. I think he played just around 85% too. I think he missed a couple games too. So it just goes to show you, man, like they got ravaged by injuries last year. And that secondary is good. That linebacker crew is good, like you said. But that secondary could be one of the best in the NFL. I agree with you.
Yeah, that's probably my biggest. I don't even know, like you said, I don't think it's probably a hot take, but
I don't think it's a hot take at all.
yeah.
I think it's kind of a sensible take because what you're asking, like people always come up with these hot takes, like they're like, "Is this a hot take?" And it's like, not really. Like, you can make a case for it. Like a hot take is like what Stephen A. Smith was saying about St. John's basketball like 2 weeks ago, saying that they were gonna smash Duke. It's like, dude, they didn't even get out of the wrong. It's like that's a hot take, but like you actually have sensible reason why you can make the case why the secondary for the Lions is one of the best, because you just got to look at those 2 safeties. Like you just got to compare. Is there anybody in the NFL, any team in the NFL that has better safeties than the Lions? No.
No, I don't think so, honestly. And I think Brian Branch is still like Kirby Joseph, I think, got his flowers this year with getting 9 interceptions. I think Brian Branch is still.
Yeah.
And people hate Kirby Joseph, so maybe that's not accurate. But outside of Detroit, everyone loves him.
Who cares what people think?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Brian Branch, the fact that like he has 100+ tackles a season is like crazy. Like that should be eye-popping whenever you see that.
I'm the sad part is I don't think he's reached his ceiling. I don't really think.
I think he's a I really think he has a defensive player of the year season in him. Like,
and
if he has, how active he is, he's gonna have like a season where he gets like a couple pick sixes, like way more, like closer to the 9 picks that Kirby Joseph had, and then he can do the plays in the back. So like maybe he gets like 3 or 4 sacks, or like he can do the plays and the impact plays all over the field. I just feel like he's going to run into one of these seasons where everything bounces his way because he's just always in the right spot. He has such good instincts. He's all over the field.
He's a guy that, Saban trusted with his defense. Like, I mean, if Saban trusts you with his defense, I mean, I know Saban hates the new college football, but he loved Brian Branch. He says it over and over again. Any chance he gets to talk about Brian Branch, he loves Brian Branch. And I don't think Brian Branch has reached his ceiling. That's the scary part, because like you said, he's gonna have a season where he's gonna be defensive player of the year or close to it.
He's got a shot.
I think it might be this year. I really do think that's gonna be the case, and I have a feeling that it's all gonna pop on defense at the same time. It's either this year or next year, or it's all gonna pop at the same time, because last year you can't count. It just doesn't count. I know people want to go back and go, oh, let's rehash things. It doesn't count.
I
It
mean, they
counts.
ranked pretty incredibly. Even after Hutchins, like really up until the Bills game, they still were ranking like top 10, top 5 and everything. I mean,
As soon as
I
Anzalone
was
went
pretty
down,
amazed at how well they held it together after Hutchinson. Like, because I was kind of like, not total doom and gloom, but I'm like, after Hutchinson got hurt, like that was just so brutal that it was like, I don't know, like I'll have to see what happens with the defense, but they like amazingly still were like more like at least allowing points wise, they were still not like it was still kind of 16 to 20 points a game, and their offense was scoring way more than that.
I thought when Hutch went down, I thought that was the end of the year. It just
I
was.
think a lot of people did, honestly.
And
That
then
was so
you
brutal.
watch them games after games after you see them knock around the Titans, which I mean, anybody can knock around the Titans. But then
The
you watch them,
Minnesota,
it was huge.
yeah.
The Houston Texan comeback win was huge. Playing Green Bay with all those starters that were missing and holding them to like what 20, like you were holding them
That was a
down pretty
great
much.
game. Yeah.
And the most unlikely player to make a tackle makes a tackle. Ezekiel Turner to ice the game. So like it's just like you want to see what they're gonna do. And I don't know about you, man, but I think people are glossing over like they're all like. I mean, we'll end the podcast in a few, but I just wanted your quick take on this. Like, um, how big of a loss is Ben Johnson and Calvin Shepard going to be? Because I'll tell you that I mean, not Calvin Shepard, Aaron Glenn. I think Aaron Glenn will be the bigger loss, in my opinion. And I think the reason why is because like everyone knows that I have a cousin who owns a shop downtown, Three Kings Sports Cards Collectibles. It's a good shop. There was a guy that came in and he said that that's Campbell's offense, and I've always went with it from that point on. And he's very closely tied into the Lions. I can't say who he is, but he's very. I'll tell you after the camera. It's easy. You'll know who exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's Dan Campbell's offense. That's basically what I was told. And then Aaron Glenn is like, seeing what he did with that defense last year, man, and the pieces that they're missing, and just hodgepodging it together. It's like kind of like when you have like you have pasta left over, you have like freaking chicken left over, and you somehow make chicken
Yeah.
parmesan, right? Like it's just like, what the hell did you make? How did you do this with the ingredients that you had? I think we're gonna miss Aaron Glenn more than people think, and I think Calvin Shepard's totally capable of stepping up, and I think John Morton, the guy that they grabbed, he was an instrumental role in developing that whole offense with Ben Johnson because he, like it or not, he was on the staff as an offensive senior guy. And even Ben Johnson, he was huge. But I truly do think that Ben Johnson was a little bit too much in the locker room.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a few thoughts. I mean, in general, I think it's still overplayed the whole like lose both your coordinators. Like, and I'd point to the Eagles. There's only been, I forget the exact stat off the top of my head, but there's hasn't been many teams that have lost both their coordinators in the same offseason over the last like 15 years. It was like the Eagles last year, and then I think maybe two other teams, and all of them made the playoffs the following year. And then even the Eagles were like the biggest dumpster fire disaster ever last year, to the point where they hired Matt Patricia to be their savior at the end. And they still won 11 games, and
that's what I'm saying, man.
Like they still like, even with it being a total nightmare, they won 11 games, like easily got into the playoffs. For most of the season, it looked like they were going to be the number 1 seed.
Yeah.
And like, yes, they just made too many ridiculous. The fact that they hired Matt Patricia, I think, kind of sums up like it was just a disaster for them, and ultimately it caved them in. But so okay, I don't think the Lions are gonna get like an F- with this, like the Eagles did last or 2 years ago with that. So I really think if your roster is as good as the Lions is, that's more important than coaches. And they have Dan Campbell, who's kind of he's the CEO. He's the guy you want to keep. Like he's had elite staff management. I don't want to underplay, the guys. I were big fans of them while they were here. I think they both did a great job, Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson. But I think the Lions' talent is ultimately what trumps it. And Dan Campbell, as much as anyone over the last couple of years, has demonstrated his staff management has been pretty dang good with getting Ben Johnson to begin with. He quickly moved on from Anthony Glenn year 1.
Yep.
and took over play calling himself, but also I think was kind of reported like he was kind of grooming Ben Johnson along with that. What he's done with the defensive backs, with uh, cycling through a couple different coaches, got rid of Dre Bly a couple years ago, brought in Deshae Townsend, who now really from all reports is kind of a guy that they think is going to be a defensive coordinator. He interviewed for the 49ers
Yep.
DC job. Tashard Choice, I think,
that was a great
going to
hire.
be a home run hire.
That was a great
and
hire.
that kind of leads me to my last point with this is like, I think Dan Campbell, the way he goes about this and including, I think he values his players and their thoughts on it. Jahmyr Gibbs is someone quoted as he went to Georgia Tech because of Tashard Choice. Like you mentioned, John Morton worked with Jared Goff. Dan Campbell indicated that Jared Goff would have a big say in who they hired. So clearly Jared Goff signed off on that. So I think when you have excitement and buy-in from the players on who they're bringing in, and that's why I think that ultimately why this, a lot of these coaches have playing career backgrounds. That's clearly a trait that they think connects with the players and that they value. So, I'm pretty excited to see what this staff looks like. And also they were able to keep a lot of coaches too. Like everyone really values Hank Fraley. Everyone really values Scotty Montgomery.
Yep.
I think Kelvin Shepard would have been the defensive coordinator with the Jets, if not another team, if the Lions didn't retain him. So there's a lot of these coaches that are still staying that I think have been huge parts of this success.
Yeah, and I think what people don't really put into the whole grand scheme of things is like John Morton's going to be a good hire. I think John Morton will be a hell of a hire. But I look at the hires that they made. You made Tashard Choice was a good hire. I look at Bruce Gradkowski, who is going to be an offensive assistant. I think he could be a really good hire, especially when you have quarterbacks and he's a former quarterback and he's really smart from what all accounts. Seth Ryan's still on the staff. I think Seth Ryan has a very interesting mind, and I think he could be a potential offensive coordinator one day. But I look at the passing game coordinator that they signed this year, and this was a guy that a lot of people wanted as a head coach a long time ago. It was David Shaw, and I think
what a legend.
David Shaw could be a huge impact into this team because he was instrumental in Andrew Luck's development, and look at that Stanford team that he had where they just developed offensive linemen like water, and it was just crazy. But you brought up Kelvin Shepard, you brought up
their linebackers coach Hamilton.
Sean
He's another guy that the NFL is super, super high on. Like that's another guy that I'm sure will be a defensive coordinator at some point.
But the guy I was the most happy that they got was Casey Rogers, the guy that came from Tampa Bay. I think that was the major thing, and I think that keeping Dave Phipp and Jet Monkins on the special teams was huge. And like I think Casey Rogers is going to pay off dividends. I think last year with
Terrell Williams.
Yeah, Terrell Williams. I love Terrell Williams because I watch Tennessee Titans football because don't ask me why. The whole Tennessee thing, I like Tennessee, but I watch the Preds and the Titans and all that jazz. But I was watching the Titans like the year before, and I was like, man, they got some good players that are like nobodies, and they're getting production out of these guys. I know they have Jeffrey Simmons, but it just like you got production out of this guy. There was this guy, his name was like Tyler Delt or something like that, and he had 2 sacks in a game against the Jaguars. I was like, who the hell is this? Like the whole Brady Breeze thing. But Casey Rogers is another guy. He developed a lot of players in Tampa Bay, so he has familiarity with Pat O'Connor too. So that's a good one. And it's just I think that they revamped the staff. And the one thing I could say about you brought it up, and I want to bring it up again, is when Dan Campbell made a mistake of hiring Anthony Lynn and hiring Aubrey Pleasant.
Oh, yep.
There was a quick hook. He was not afraid to admit his mistake. You know what I'm saying? That was the major thing. Like he admitted his mistake really early on. Like he said, screw it. This isn't working. I'm not gonna sit here and act like it's gonna work in the future. We're just gonna cut it off right now and say spade's a spade and just call it a day. And I think that's the most admirable fact about Dan Campbell is that if he makes the wrong decision, which we're all prone to do as humans, he can admit it really quickly, and that's accountability. And I think that goes along the whole team. Like the accountability factor goes on the whole team. And then the second part that you said, I agree with 100% is Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, they're great coordinators. I think they're going to be fine wherever they go. I think Ben Johnson will be fine. I think Aaron Glenn will be better, to be honest.
It'd be
If he,
great if Ben Johnson just blew up and it was a disaster in Chicago, though. Just
I
because
think
of
that
and that's a big reason I didn't want him to go there. I like Ben Johnson, but I have to not like him now. He's the Bears coach.
I think
So
there's a
hopefully it
possibility.
blows up in his face.
I think there's a possibility it blows up because I'll tell you this right now. Coaching does not matter if you don't have a culture. And I don't think they have a culture. And if he can establish a culture, fine. We'll see if he can.
Yeah.
But establishing a culture is the hardest thing to do as a coach. And so many coaches fail at it, even if they're like the greatest assistant in the world. Matt Nagy was a guy who was a Chiefs OC, and they
Right.
were like, hell yeah, this guy, Matt Patricia, another guy, ruined the culture. It's just like, that's the type of things that could happen. But like, I look at this team and I just look at the talent, and there's so many good players on this team. Like, do you really think Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are like back in New York and Chicago and going, my team's hands down better than Detroit? No,
Ben
it's not.
Johnson said himself, anyone could be the offensive coordinator. That was one of his quotes when he got hired by the Bears. He's like, honestly, it just got to the point where I think anyone could be the offensive coordinator there, and they would be incredible. Which is true. Like when you have the offense that the line, like the personnel that the Lions have, like their floor is only so low as an offense.
And people they always want to go at Jared Goff because he's limited as a runner, and I don't really care if he's limited as a runner, to be honest. He's a good passer. He's a damn good passer, and the offensive line is so damn good. And you got two great running backs. You got a good elite wide receiver, and then you got a kid that's coming up and coming. And then I would say Tim Patrick might be
two
the
elite wide receivers. J-Mo's elite.
I think J-Mo is trending there. I won't say elite yet because I don't want to jinx myself because I don't want to do that anyways. But I think J-Mo is heading that way, especially if you look at his statistics. And he missed a couple games, and he was near CeeDee Lamb. And I know CeeDee Lamb didn't have a quarterback for a couple games, but geez, oh Pete's like CeeDee Lamb is CeeDee Lamb. I mean, up until he got hurt and they took him out, he was in my fantasy team, which really effing sucked. It really sucked because they took him out the championship game. And I was like, yeah, just let him go for another week. But no, it was when you can outpace CeeDee Lamb, and it was less catches. I think it was like 40 less catches than CeeDee Lamb had. It tells you all about
the play ability is good.
Big play ability, yeah, exactly.
And I think that just plays into his like the fit, because we don't need to give him the ball like 30 times a game. If he gets his 150-yard touchdown, like he's happy, and like it's not that hard. He only needs the ball so many times he's gonna break something. Like he's
such a dynamic player. It's the same thing with Gibbs. Like if you give Gibbs 15 touches, like how many of those touches can he really make a thing happen? Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't take many. He's not a running back that needs the touches to get him. Like Derrick Henry's a guy that needs the touches. He kind of gets better as the game goes on. That's how Derrick Henry is. That's why I never understood why the Ravens trade for him, because if Lamar is running the ball and then you're only giving Henry it 15 times, it defeats the whole purpose of having Derrick Henry, because he needs like 20, 30 carries a game. Gibbs, he needs 15 carries a game, and he can make things happen at a moment's notice. So, like I said, it's just the talent level at this Lions offense. Like, I'm pretty sure if anybody can call it, like Ben Johnson said, like it's so easy. Like it's kind of like you're on men rookie level. Like you're just like, all right, Tim Patrick here, you go. Even a guy like Allen Robinson last year was catching some crazy balls. I mean, Zylstra, up until he got hurt in preseason, was looking really, really good. That's why I was happy they signed him. Brock Wright looked pretty decent, and Laporta started to come on after his injury. That was pretty good, but it just goes to show you, man, there's so much to look forward to, and I think this defense is going to be good, and the offense is going to be good. So I think, like you said, secondary could be the best in the NFL, and the offense, I mean, it is the best in the NFL, one of the best in the NFL for sure.
Yeah, I mean their schedule is pretty brutal next year, but it is pretty much all road games that are tough, which could benefit them, because I do think they're, if not the best road team in the NFL, right up there. So they really, and their home schedule is like the exact opposite. Like it is a lot of, you look at their home schedule and it's like, okay, I don't think they're losing to the Browns and the Giants and some of these teams. So even the Cowboys, like I think the Lions could destroy the Cowboys at home next year. So if they just tread water on the road, which I think they could, and kind of clean up the home schedule, and they don't need to, as we've kind of found out this year, just stay relatively healthy. And I like this team's chances going into the postseason. Now they have some postseason experience. Hopefully they can draw on the losses now too. They've had a devastating postseason loss. They've had a kind of a blowout where everything went wrong. They've played some really good playoff. That's the other thing with Jared Goff. Everyone wants to say Jared Goff stinks because he was awful against the 49 or against the Commanders. He played at a really high level. All three of the previous games last year, he played more than good enough for the Lions to beat the 49ers. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be tough too, because now that the expectation is just win the Super Bowl or everyone's pissed off, that is kind of a tough season as a fan to maneuver in some ways, just because it feels like no matter, like they need to win the Super Bowl or else everyone's pissed. That has been an adjustment, I think, for a lot of fans and still is. But this is a franchise that, as long as they have Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, it's hard for me to think that they're not going to be in the mix. And I pointed this out on Twitter a couple of times. If you go down the list of these franchises that are like the good ones, like the Eagles and the Packers and the 49ers and the Chiefs, like for the most part, if you have the right ownership, the right GM, you should be in the mix for like basically every year. Even like the Seahawks for 10 years, basically getting to the playoffs every year, winning a Super Bowl, should have won another one. This Lions team, it really shouldn't be just a 1 or 2 year window with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. I really don't think.
No, and you're right. The schedule is brutal. I mean, they play the AFC North and the NFC East, so that's difficult. But you look at the schedule; it's a tough schedule. They got to go on the road against the Baltimore Ravens and the Bengals and the Chiefs, and they got to go on the road to Philadelphia and Washington. So that's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. But look, I think they're going to be a better team than they were this year because the amount of injuries that you had last year, I mean, you're only going to get better. There's just no way you get worse. And even with the coordinators changing, like I could see where you get better in the right ways. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to like fall off a cliff like some of these people project. That's my opinion. So this was a great podcast, man.
Will we see one last question? Will we see the Lions finally lose 2 games in a row this year? That's stat that I think dates back to now 2022, I think, is the last time they lost back-to-back games.
Yeah, since that 1-6 start that they had. And I don't know. It depends on
how they keep that again this year. That'd be crazy.
If they do that again, I mean, they're probably getting the first overall seed.
Yeah, probably. So, yeah.
Because that's insane. The statistic that they haven't lost 2 in a row since that 1-6 start. It's crazy. I just every time I think about that stat, I just go.
That always stands out to me. I always think
you could play you could play 100 games on Madden or whatever on all Madden, and you still would lose. There'd be 2 games where you lose in a row. Like that's just the way it goes. Yeah. But I mean, this is an insane start, but it depends on who you get, like schedule wise. Like if the schedule is good, like it was last year, where you got them spaced out, that'd be good. But there's no really wiggle room with this schedule. I mean, even like the Bengals and the Giants, like. I mean, the Bengals got Joe Burrow, so that's tough right there. But you look at the Cowboys, like they're gonna get Dak Prescott back, but they're coming to Ford Field, so that'll be fun.
That's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And then they're going to LA, they're going to Kansas City, they're going to Philadelphia. Like those are all gonna be games. My worst fear is that you get a schedule where you go Philadelphia, Washington, or no, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and then you go to Los Angeles for the Rams. That would be like a 3-game death nail because you're going to lose one of those games. You just don't know who you're going to lose it to. And if you lose all 3, I mean, is anybody going to be like, oh my God, the sky is falling? Well, I'm sure there'll be people that are saying the sky is falling, but it's however they schedule whenever the schedule comes out and the way it's structured, that's usually the biggest like barometer of how things go, in my opinion. Like, how is it structured? Like,
Right.
are you gonna get like 3 home games in a row and then 3 away games or 4 away games? Like, that's what sucks when you have that
Hopefully we
road.
get a late bye. We can't have this BS early bye again. Hopefully
Well, if
that's
you
like built in. I feel like they basically complained about that enough to where we'll get like one of the best bye weeks this season.
that early bye week was the worst thing that could happen. You
That
know,
was
I know a lot of people love the early bye week, especially like the players or whatever. But I felt like with the team that they had and the injuries that started to fall, that started to come apart.
Yeah.
Like after that bye week, you just started seeing people just fall. Like it was like dominoes. So
Yeah.
it was terrible. But this was a great podcast, man. I gotta have you on again. This was
Yeah,
a
for
lot
sure.
of fun. It was a lot of fun, and you guys should go follow them at section. What is it?
Section 344 Lions.
Okay, cool. I'll put the link on the Facebook page. That way people can know. I'll put it in the comments too. So if people are, on the YouTube or they're on the Apple Podcasts or Spotify, they can just click it and go to your Twitter. Because look, I think you're gonna be on for a lot because I think you're fun. We had a long podcast this one. This was a longer one, but it was great. We talked about a lot of things. I think a lot of people are gonna be really enjoyed to see this. Listen to this and watch it because like some people do watch on YouTube. But yeah, it was a great podcast, and we'll have to have you on before the draft because that's like the biggest. This is like the biggest time of the year, and then we'll have you on the regular season too, dude. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then you got it. You got to. Are you going to opening day?
For the Tigers?
Yeah.
I probably will. I normally do.
If you do, come to my my cousin's card shop. I'll
Oh
be down.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I definitely have to check that out.
they're having an opening day party. I don't have this freaking graphic up because I was gonna put the graphic up for people that wanted to go. But if you're going to a opening day, Three Kings Sports Cards Collectibles, they're gonna have a party or whatever. And then if you want to watch there and open some cards or whatever, you could do that. They're gonna have food too, so it'll be a lot of fun. So anybody that's on the podcast, listening to the podcast, you can come all day Friday. It's gonna be a hoot. And thank God they're playing the Chicago White Sox.
I know.
That's a great one because I have a rough this whole start to the season for the Tigers. You talk about
Dodgers,
schedule
Yankees.
maker.
Yeah.
This start to the year for the Tigers is the one I don't want the Lions to get because you go play the World Series the World Series champion, the Dodgers, and you go to Seattle. They never do good on the West Coast, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like this is the exact thing I'm talking about with the Lions schedule that I don't want to happen with what the Tigers are dealing with. So we will see you guys in the next podcast. We'll talk more Detroit Lions football. Thank you for coming on, James. I appreciate it. And it was a great podcast. We had a lot of fun. I can't believe we burned almost 2 hours on this thing. So thanks for coming on, man. I'll definitely reach out to you after the podcast for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I had a great time and looking forward to being on again.
All right, you definitely will be, man. I'll be in constant contact with you. But
Awesome.
We'll see you guys later, and you guys can we'll play the intro out and then have a good one.